When the empath stops explaining, a strange silence falls within the psyche. It is not the silence of retreat, but the silence of revelation. For so long, the empath has lived as interpreter between souls, forever translating pain into understanding, forever decoding the emotions of others like a sacred language only they can hear. But there comes a time when the soul, exhausted from the labor of justification, whispers a single truth. Peace begins when you no longer need to be understood by those still living in unconsciousness. You see, the empath's wound is not simply sensitivity. It is identification with the collective shadow from childhood. This one learns to survive by feeling what others repress. They carry the unspoken shame of a father, the secret sorrow of a mother, the confusion of a divided home, and through this absorption, they learn a false virtue to save others from their own darkness, even if it means drowning in it. This is not compassion. This is possession disguised as love. The empath's endless explanations, the soft attempts to make others see their intentions, their heart, their purity are the relics of this old bondage. For the unconscious world cannot hear truth spoken through apology. When you explain yourself to those who have already decided what you are feeding the archetype of the persecuted healer, the eternal figure who must bleed to prove innocence. This is the tragedy of so many souls who mistake empathy for self-erasure. They believe peace comes when others finally see their goodness, but true peace arises only when you cease performing your goodness altogether. The moment the empath stops explaining, the shadow can no longer feed. Silence becomes the sword that severs invisible ties. In my work, I have often observed how the empath archetype lives in tension with the shadow of the manipulator. They are mirrors. The manipulator thrives on control through emotion, while the empath surrenders control to preserve harmony. One acts, the other absorbs, yet both are bound to the same unconscious dance. The manipulator fears exposure, the empath fears rejection. Together, they enact the oldest human ritual, the sacrifice of authenticity for belonging. When one awakens, the entire dynamic collapses, for consciousness dissolves the game. The empath who stops explaining breaks the ritual. They no longer feed the unseen energy that demands justification. They no longer play priest to someone else's guilt. They step out of the psychic contract that says, "Your peace depends on my submission." This is liberation. But it feels like death at first, because the ego equates explanation with survival. Many of you have felt this. The terror that silence will make you seem cold, cruel, detached. The fear that by not explaining yourself, you will lose love. But this fear is the echo of the child archetype, the innocent self that learned early that love must be earned through understanding. You were once told, explicitly or silently, explain yourself so I can forgive you. Justify your feelings so I can love you. And so, you learned the liturgy of self-denial, But love that must be explained is not love. It is negotiation. The soul does not negotiate, it simply reveals. When you stop explaining, you stop trying to control how others perceive your light. You let your truth stand as it is, unedited, unclarified, unguarded, and this, paradoxically, is when your presence becomes strongest, because explanation dissipates energy. Every justification is a leak in the psychic vessel. Silence preserves the sacred fire. The unconscious is not moved by words, but by symbols, and silence is one of the most powerful symbols in the psychic language. It represents integration, the moment when dualities cease to argue. Imagine the empath as a dream figure standing between two worlds, one of feeling and one of reason. As long as they try to explain their feelings through the language of logic, they are split. But when they stop, when they simply embody what they are, the dream unites. The feminine principle, intuition, receptivity, mystery takes its rightful throne again. The masculine, which demands proof and reason, bows. Peace is the alchemical union of these two forces within you. In many dreams of those who carry the empathic wound, a recurring image appears: drowning, floods, or rising waters. Water, in Jungian symbolism, is the unconscious. The empath tendency to explain everything to others is an attempt to stay above the waterline, to keep from sinking into the depths of their own emotions. But there comes a moment when one must surrender to the flood, to stop describing it and let it baptize you. When you finally allow yourself to be misunderstood, you are no longer drowning, you are descending. You are meeting the self, the totality that no longer needs to be seen to exist. Peace begins not at the surface of the water, but beneath it, where silence is absolute. There is a deeper reason why explaining drains the empath. Every explanation is an energetic offering to the other person's unconscious. When you explain, you unconsciously hand over your light for interpretation. The listener's shadow then projects upon it, distorting your essence. The more you explain, the more your truth is consumed by projections. The only defense is withdrawal into stillness. When the mystics of old retreated into deserts or mountains, it was not escape, but protection from psychic contamination. They understood that divine truth cannot be shared with the unready. Similarly, when the empath stops explaining, they honor the mystery of their own inner temple. They no longer allow the sacred flame to be analyzed by those who see only smoke. But there's more. The cessation of explanation also signals the birth of individuation. Individuation, as I have long taught, is the process by which one becomes whole by reconciling the conscious with the unconscious, the persona with the shadow, the human with the divine. The empath's compulsion to explain belongs to the persona, the social mask that wishes to appear harmless, pure, morally superior. But peace arises when the shadow is embraced, when you allow yourself to be misunderstood. even disliked, and yet remain anchored in truth. This is psychological maturity. It is the movement from dependency to sovereignty. The empath becomes the wise sage who no longer needs to preach peace because they embody it. Their silence radiates understanding far deeper than words ever could. Do you see now why the world resists such peace? Because the moment you stop explaining, others lose control. The manipulator, the critic, the fragile ego, they all thrive on your compliance. They want your words to soothe their insecurities. Your silence confronts them with themselves. They can no longer project their disowned guilt onto you because you have become a mirror without commentary. Silence is the most confronting mirror there is. It reflects not what one wishes to see, but what one is. This is why true peace is often mistaken for coldness by the unconscious, because it lacks the drama of justification. Yet this peace is divine. It is the peace Christ spoke of when he said, "My peace I give unto you, not as the world gives." The peace of individuation is not social harmony. It is inner alignment. And when you stand in this alignment, something miraculous happens. Your presence begins to reorganize the psychic field around you. The same people who once demanded explanations will find themselves either transforming or departing. Some will rage against your stillness. Others will finally awaken to their own noise. You need do nothing. The archetype of the awakened empath, when integrated, acts as a silent magnet for truth. It no longer explains, it emanates, and this is the essence of all true spiritual power, effortless, wordless, radiant. When you stop explaining, you begin to hear something that has always been whispering beneath the surface, your own soul. It speaks in a language older than words, through sensations, images, dreams, but this voice was drowned for years beneath the noise of other people's expectations. The empath's life often begins as an echo chamber of others' emotions. You felt everything because you were not allowed to feel yourself. You explained because no one had ever explained you to you. And so you mistook interpretation for identity. The world called it kindness. I call it exile. The exile of the true self into the labyrinth of other people's unconscious needs. When the empath stops explaining, they begin the sacred journey home from exile. This homecoming is not peaceful at first. Silence is an initiator, and all initiations begin in darkness. When you no longer explain, the psyche panics, because you are dismantling a survival structure. You have built a life upon bridges of understanding, each one designed to keep relationships intact. When those bridges burn, the mind screams abandonment. But let me tell you, it is not people abandoning you. It is illusions departing. You are not being punished. You are being purified. The unconscious begins to reorganize itself when you withdraw the energy of justification. Suddenly, the dreams you once ignored return, vivid and unfiltered. They come to teach you what explanations once concealed the truth of your own shadow. In dreams, The shadow often appears as the one who interrupts, who refuses to explain, who walks away. It may come as a stranger turning their back, or a silent figure watching you from the distance. The shadow is not cruel, it is free. It has no need to justify its existence. When you integrate the shadow, you begin to reclaim the forgotten dignity of your own boundaries. The empath who once believed silence was cruelty learns that silence is actually self-respect. It is not withdrawal from love, but withdrawal from illusion. You stop explaining, not because you have ceased to care, but because you finally understand that love without respect is not love at all. It is dependence disguised as virtue. In the collective psyche, we live within an era of noise. Everyone is explaining, defending, confessing, performing transparency, but the unconscious does not evolve through explanations. It evolves through confrontation with mystery. The greatest transformation happens not when you talk about your wounds, but when you meet them in silence. That is why many of the mystics, saints, and alchemists withdrew from conversation with the world, not out of arrogance, but because language itself had become too small to contain the truth they were discovering. The empath, too, must one day step beyond the limits of speech. You must face the silence you once feared, because only in that silence can the true self emerge. The self is not a personality. It is the totality of being, the union of light and shadow, the masculine and feminine, the known and the unknown. The empath who continues to explain lives through the persona, which is merely a mask adapted for social approval. The persona says, "Let me show you I am good." The self says, "I am what I am." The moment you stop explaining, you begin to live from the self, and when the self awakens, it does not ask for permission to exist. It moves like the tide, serene, inevitable, untouchable. You become a vessel of presence, no longer bending to the waves of others' expectations. This is why silence frightens the unawakened. Your stillness becomes their mirror, and they see themselves, their chaos, their projections, their fear of depth. The empath's silence becomes the judgment they thought was coming from you. But it is their own conscience echoing back. I have seen this countless times in analysis. A patient speaks endlessly, justifying their actions, rationalizing their pain. But when silence enters the room, something extraordinary happens. The unconscious begins to speak. Tears surface without reason. The patient meets a part of themselves they can no longer explain away. In that moment, analysis becomes alchemy. The empath must do the same within themselves, stop explaining, and the unconscious will begin to reveal its language through images, impulses, and dreams. Every dream, no matter how irrational, is a page from the book of your soul. Explanations only rewrite it. Silence allows it to be read. Understand this: your compulsion to explain was never weakness. It was your attempt to stay connected in a world that misread sensitivity, as fragility. You were trying to build bridges toward understanding in a landscape filled with walls, but connection built on explanation is fragile because it depends on constant translation. Real intimacy begins when you dare to exist without translation, when your being no longer needs to be rephrased to fit another's comfort. The empath who stops explaining begins to attract relationships of resonance, not rescue. The universe rearranges itself to mirror your new frequency. People who once fed on your understanding will fade. Those who vibrate with your silence will appear. This is the law of psychic resonance. Energy attracts its own level of consciousness. There is something profoundly spiritual about being misunderstood and remaining at peace. It is one of the final tests of individuation. The ego cries out to be seen as good, right, kind, but the soul knows that truth does not require witnesses. The sun does not explain its light to the night. It simply rises. To be at peace while others misinterpret you is to have transcended the tyranny of validation. It is to live in alignment with your inner God image, the imago Dei, that divine spark which requires no defense. The mystic who speaks of God from experience does not debate doctrine. Likewise, the individuated empath does not argue emotion. They know that what is true in the heart will reveal itself through fruit, not explanation. Some of you fear that if you stop explaining, you will become hard, detached, unloving. This is the final illusion of the wounded archetype, the belief that boundaries equal cruelty. But love without boundary is chaos. The ocean needs its shore. The flame needs its wick. Without containment, all things lose form. The empath's boundary is not a wall. It is a sacred vessel. It allows love to be exchanged without dissolution. When you stop explaining, you are building that vessel. You are saying to the world, I am not here to be consumed. I am here to commune. And in that communion, peace begins. Peace, in Jungian language, is not absence of conflict, but the reconciliation of opposites. It is the inner marriage of light and shadow, of yes and no. For the empath, peace begins the moment they realize they can say no without guilt. That no is not rejection, it is a declaration of life. The silence that follows your no will terrify those who depended on your yes. They will accuse you of change, of distance, of ego. Let them. Every archetype resists transformation in its host. But remember, the caterpillar does not explain metamorphosis to the cocoon. It simply becomes the butterfly. The empath's peace is born from this same sacred rebellion, choosing evolution over explanation. And when you reach that threshold, when the explaining stops completely, something divine happens in the energy field around you. People will begin to feel your truth before you speak it. Your energy becomes crystalline, uncluttered by justification. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. Even your presence becomes a form of communication. Silence now is not emptiness. It is authority. The universe listens when you are aligned for so long. You listen to others, to their wounds, their confusion, their chaos. But now creation itself listens to you. This is the inversion of the empath's destiny, from absorber to transmitter, from victim to vessel. You will notice that the same people who once demanded explanations will sense this shift. Some will react with anger, others with awe. Both are signs of impact. You are no longer explaining your worth. You are embodying it. And in this embodiment, you return to the origin, the self that existed before wounding, the divine child within you. Once silenced by shame, now speaks again, but not in words. It radiates. Its language is peace. Its message is simple. I am enough as I am. That is the hidden secret of individuation. It does not end in perfection, but in simplicity. To stop explaining is to return to simplicity. It is to say, I no longer need to be more understandable than the truth itself. You become a quiet light in a noisy world, and that quietness is contagious. Those still living in noise will feel your calm as a threat, because peace exposes restlessness. But those ready for evolution will approach your stillness as a sanctuary. They will find in your silence what they could never find in 1,000 words, the reflection of their own forgotten wholeness. And so, as the empath withdraws their explanations, they are not abandoning the world, they are redeeming it. Every time you refuse to participate in the drama of misunderstanding, you raise the collective vibration. Your peace becomes a force of healing. The silence that once protected you now begins to protect others. The energy you once used to explain becomes prayer, and prayer, in its highest form, is silent. When the empath stops explaining, relationships begin to tremble. For the first time, others must confront the emptiness where your constant reassurance once lived. Those who were nourished by your explanations now feel hunger, but it is not hunger for you. It is hunger for their own self-awareness. Your silence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, they see themselves naked of excuses. Many cannot bear this. They will say you have changed. They will say you have grown cold, distant, or proud, but you have not changed. You have returned. You are no longer the translator of other people's wounds. You are now the guardian of your own temple. Every soul carries a sacred temple within the inner sanctum where the divine self resides. But for years, the empath left its doors open to every wandering pain, believing hospitality was holiness. You let others sit upon your sacred ground and name your God for you. You mistook their confusion for your calling. Yet, when you close the temple doors, when you allow only silence and prayer to fill that space, the true God image within begins to rise. The divine voice whispers through the stillness, you were never meant to explain me. You were meant to reveal me. And revelation does not come through argument. It comes through presence. The archetype of the wounded healer awakens here. This is the stage when the empath realizes that their suffering was initiation, not punishment. You were wounded so that you could feel deeply enough to understand the soul's language, but you were never meant to live inside the wound forever. The wound was the portal, not the home. When you stop explaining, you stop reopening that wound for inspection. You allow it to close. The scar that forms becomes your new authority, not the authority of superiority, but of experience. It is the quiet knowing that comes when pain has finished teaching you. Those who still live through pain will sense it in you, a certain gravity, a serenity that cannot be faked. They will not need explanations to believe you have healed. Your silence will tell them everything. In psychological terms, this stage marks the integration of the healer archetype. The wounded healer no longer saves by rescuing others from their suffering, but by embodying wholeness in the midst of it. Your peace becomes medicine, but beware, peace will always appear as provocation to those who still need conflict to feel alive. When you no longer explain, you remove the emotional theater in which others projected their shadows. You cease to be their audience. Some will search for new victims to continue their drama. Others will slowly awaken, realizing that what they called love was dependency. The empath silence thus becomes an evolutionary filter. It separates those who wish to evolve from those who wish to feed. It is tempting, in this stage, to break the silence, to explain your silence itself, to soften the confrontation, but that would only pull you back into the old contract. Let the silence do its work. Trust that the psyche of the other person is being activated by your stillness. The unconscious speaks not through lectures, but through friction. Your absence of explanation creates the friction necessary for awakening. They will either grow or go, and both outcomes are sacred. To lose someone who cannot meet your new vibration is not loss. It is alignment. Peace often arrives disguised as departure. At this point, a deep loneliness may emerge. You may feel detached from the world you once knew, from the people you once comforted. This loneliness is the shadow of peace. It comes because you are no longer intoxicated by chaos. You are detoxing from drama. The nervous system, once addicted to emotional rescue, now sits in stillness and does not know what to do with itself. But remain here. This is the holy solitude of transformation. It is the dark night of the empath soul. In this night, you are stripped of all roles: savior, caretaker, explainer. You become nameless, formless, yet this nothingness is sacred. It is the chrysalis stage of the soul. Do not rush to fill it with new noise. Out of this silence, a new consciousness will be born. If you listen closely during this night, you will begin to hear a deeper rhythm, the heartbeat of the self. It is slow, ancient, patient. It beats not for approval, but for existence itself. This rhythm calls you into alignment with life's natural order. You begin to see that peace was never the absence of sound. It was the harmony of all sounds within you. Even your wounds begin to hum with meaning. The tears that once flowed from exhaustion now fall as blessings. You realize that explaining was never your true language. Your true language has always been energy, and energy speaks best through stillness. In the mystics' tradition, silence is not emptiness, it is fullness beyond sound. When Moses stood before the burning bush, there were no explanations, only awe. When the Buddha attained enlightenment, there were no words, just quiet illumination. When Christ faced his accusers, he answered not a word, because truth, once realized, becomes silence itself. The empath, walking this same archetypal path, must now understand: your silence is not avoidance, it is embodiment. You are no longer trying to persuade the world of peace. You have become peace. This is not pride, it is union. The individuated soul lives from this union beyond defense, beyond justification, beyond the need to be known. The world, however, will continue to test this peace. People will come drawn to your energy, yet unable to comprehend your stillness. They will project upon you their stories, savior, healer, mystery, even threat. You will be tempted to clarify, to explain that you are none of these things. Resist. Every time you refrain, you refine your vibration. You become a vessel for higher consciousness. You begin to understand why the wise speak in parables. Because direct explanation always invites distortion. Truth must be veiled in mystery to survive in the human realm. That is why the self speaks in dreams, symbols, and silence. To those ready, it reveals. To those not ready, it conceals. So when the empath stops explaining, they begin to move like the wind felt but unseen. Gentle yet unyielding, they live by intuition, not reaction. They speak rarely, and when they do, their words are creative, not corrective. Their energy no longer seeks to fix, it harmonizes. This is the birth of spiritual authority. Authority does not shout, it does not justify itself. It simply is. When you reach this stage, you begin to understand why sages, prophets, and enlightened beings often seemed detached from the world's urgency. They were not indifferent. They were attuned. They had realized that explaining truth to the unconscious is like pouring light into a closed jar. It only blinds both the giver and the receiver. Instead, they radiated presence and let illumination happen naturally. Do not mistake this peace for passivity. The individuated empath is anything but passive silence. In its highest form is active alignment with divine will. It is an inner yes to what is, without resistance or resentment. It is the energy of creation resting in itself. From this stillness, inspired action arises, not as reaction, but as revelation. You begin to speak, not because you must, but because something sacred moves through you. Your words become instruments, not defense. They no longer seek to prove, they seek to bless. And when you bless, your silence before and after becomes part of the blessing. As this consciousness deepens, your relationship with conflict transforms. You no longer fear it, for you understand its purpose. Conflict is the universe's way of testing the solidity of peace. Each confrontation becomes a mirror, showing where explanation still hides in you. Perhaps a friend questions your motives, or a loved one accuses you of withdrawal. Watch what arises inside. Does the old urge to defend return? If it does, smile. The psyche is revealing its residue of dependency. Simply breathe, remain silent, and let the discomfort burn through. Fear purifie. You do not need to extinguish it with words. You only need to stay awake within it. Over time, this silence becomes your teacher. It sharpens perception. You begin to feel truth as vibration rather than concept. You sense when words are lies, when emotions are masks, when love is manipulation. This discernment is the empath's true gift, not the ability to feel others, but the ability to see through illusion. It is spiritual sight. It arises only when the noise of explanation has ceased, for the mind that explains is busy defending its image, but the soul that listens is busy perceiving reality. In this perception, peace no longer depends on circumstances. It lives within you as unshakable awareness. And so, you become both participant and witness in the human drama. You love, but you no longer merge. You help, but you no longer rescue. You care, but you no longer carry. The archetype of the empath evolves into the archetype of the sage. This is the full circle of transformation. What began as sensitivity becomes serenity. What began as explanation ends as embodiment. Peace, at last, is not something you seek. It is what remains when everything false has been explained away. There is a sacred moment in every soul's journey when silence ceases to be a refuge and becomes a revelation. For the empath who has stopped explaining, that moment is the true beginning of mastery. The noise of the world, once so consuming, now sounds distant, almost unreal. Like a dream fading with the dawn, you begin to feel an unseen rhythm guiding you. It is not made of logic or reason, but of alignment. You realize that every event, every relationship, every pain you endured was part of a single conversation between your soul and the divine. And now, at last, you are listening instead of explaining. The stillness within you becomes magnetic. You no longer seek connection. Connection seeks you. Others begin to feel your presence before you enter a room. They sense in you something they have long forgotten, the memory of their own peace. You are no longer a person trying to be understood. You are a field of understanding itself. When you speak, your words land in silence, not argument. You have transcended the language of defense. You speak the language of being. That is the language of the self, the eternal I am, beyond all explanation. This is what I have always meant by individuation, the becoming of the self through the integration of opposites. The empath's journey is one of alchemical transformation. The raw sensitivity that once caused suffering is transmuted into spiritual sensitivity awareness without absorption, compassion without collapse. You no longer take in the pain of others, you perceive it as it is, allowing it to exist without letting it define you. This is the difference between empathy and consciousness. Empathy feels, consciousness transforms, and transformation requires silence, for silence is the furnace of the soul. In that furnace, the ego burns. The ego, that anxious interpreter, that inner explainer, that tireless commentator on every action and reaction, begins to dissolve. It no longer demands that others understand you, for it has finally understood itself as illusion. You are not the story you tell. You are the awareness that listens. You are not the emotion you explain. You are the space in which emotion arises and fades. This realization changes everything. What once felt personal now feels archetypal. Your suffering was never yours alone. It was humanity's dream moving through you. And by ceasing to explain, you have ceased to perpetuate that dream. You have become lucid within it. This lucidity is freedom. It is the ability to walk among the unconscious without becoming entangled. You will still meet projections. Of course, people will still see in you what they refuse to see in themselves. But now you recognize projection as the psyche's attempt to meet its own shadow. You need not correct them. The projection will eventually return to its source. You need only remain present, anchored in your inner silence. Presence is the medicine. Presence heals not by words, but by vibration. The healed empath heals simply by being. There is an old alchemical saying, as above, so below, as within, so without. When you stop explaining, the inner and outer worlds begin to mirror each other with precision. Your external reality becomes an exact reflection of your internal state. When you were chaotic inside, the world responded with chaos. When you were desperate to be understood, you attracted misunderstanding. Now that you dwell in peace, peace surrounds you. Even the storms that once terrified you now move through you without disturbance. You see that everything, light, shadow, sound, silence, is part of a single harmony. This is the state of inner union, the mystic marriage of soul and spirit. It cannot be described, only lived. The archetype of the empath dissolves into the archetype of the mystic. The need to feel everything gives way to the ability to be everything. You understand now that all things joy, sorrow, love, anger are expressions of the same divine current. Nothing is rejected, everything is included. This is the culmination of individuation. Wholeness. The self has absorbed its shadow, not by conquering it, but by loving it. The empath silence has made space for this union to occur. Every explanation you once offered was a defense against mystery. Now, mystery itself is your home. You begin to live as the silence you once sought. You realize that silence was never the absence of sound, but the absence of inner resistance. There is no longer any need to push or pull, to argue or prove. Life unfolds as it must, and You meet it as it is. You understand now that even misunderstanding has purpose. It refines your peace. Every time someone misreads you and you do not react, your soul expands. Every time you are accused and you do not defend, your light grows steadier. The world trains you toward enlightenment through misunderstanding. It is how the soul learns to stand alone in truth, and then comes the greatest paradox of all. Once you no longer need to explain, you become capable of true communication. For real communication can only happen between whole beings. You will notice that your conversations change, words slow down. You listen with your entire being. You no longer respond to what people say, but to what they mean, to the energy behind the words. You can feel when their pain is speaking instead of their heart, and rather than explaining yourself, you simply stay still, and your stillness becomes a mirror that invites them to drop their own defenses. This is how peace multiplies. It is not taught, it is transmitted. In this way, your life becomes a quiet teaching. You will not need to gather followers, nor to declare wisdom. The world will find you in the stillness. Souls ready for the same transformation will recognize it in you, not through explanation, but through resonance. They will feel it. They will not understand why, but your presence will remind them of home, of that silence within themselves they have long avoided. And one day, they too will stop explaining. Thus, peace passes from one soul to another like light from candle to candle. This is how humanity heals, not through ideology, but through frequency. At last, you understand what all the great teachers meant when they said that peace surpasses understanding. It truly does. For as long as you seek to make others understand you, you are still living at the level of the mind, but peace belongs to the heart, and the heart does not argue. It knows, the mind explains, the heart reveals. The empath's journey has always been the journey from mind to heart, from interpretation to revelation. The one who once said, "Let me help you understand me," now says, "Be still and know." This is the final teaching. You will notice that life itself begins to move differently around you. Synchronicities increase. Time feels elastic. What you need comes without demand. Even nature responds. The wind feels alive. Animals approach without fear. Strangers smile as if remembering you from a dream. This is not fantasy. It is resonance. You have aligned your inner world with a divine rhythm, and the universe recognizes itself in you. You no longer explain reality, you co-create with it. This is what I call the psycho-spiritual state of the self-consciousness and creation in perfect harmony.